Hello, my friend. I'm Gloria Mitchell with good news for you. Today, our topic is cast your vote. Why? Because your vote counts. We want to talk about voting privileges. Do you know that you have a civic duty to vote? Yes, not only is it a civic duty, but it is a constitutional right as well as a privilege. People died so that you might have the right to vote. That's good news to me, that someone was willing to sacrifice so that others might enjoy the rights and privileges that are awarded to other Americans. And so, because I'm a proud American and many people are sitting around watching the elections of the candidates who are vying for the presidential nomination, I want to make sure that you understand that your vote counts. And so today, I want you right now to remember civil rights leader Julian Bond. There is a picture of him that hopefully you can see that if you're watching. Julian Bond, who is one who was elected to the Georgia House. And yet, even though he was voted into office, the white politicians did not allow him to take his seat. So we had to have the federal government assist in that endeavor. And not only did he get his seat in the Georgia Congress, but he went on to the Senate, and he is very well known for being a marvelous civil rights leader, and that is Julian Bond, who died on August the 15th, 2015. So with all of that in mind, I introduce to you today my guests who have come to us from the League of Women Voters, and they are, first of all, it's Rosalind Tyson, and then we have Marcia James. So I'm going to begin by asking them to tell a little about themselves. So let's start with you, Roz.
Gloria, I am a lawyer. I worked for 30 years for the Securities and Exchange Commission, the last 5 as the head of the office here in Los Angeles. And when I retired, I had the time to be able to volunteer for the League of Women Voters. We're a nonpartisan group whose whole goal is to get people to register and to get informed so they can cast an informed ballot.
Oh, wonderful. Welcome. And then as you, Marcia, are looking into the camera and telling us all about what you're doing,
all right.
Yeah, do that for us, please.
Yeah, Marcia James, and I was a teacher in Los Angeles Unified School District, and after I retired, I decided I wanted to do volunteer work, and one of my chief areas was voting and just understanding politics, period. So I joined the League of Women Voters, and I've been on the voter committee, service committee. I enjoy working with young people, and I've been able to help them with learning what the process is about and how they can register and vote as soon as they're 18.
Okay, well, with that being said, and with my guest being introduced, I want to share with you now a video clip for those who are watching. It's President Lyndon B. Johnson as he signs the 1965 Voting Rights Act.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, members of the Congress, I speak tonight for the dignity of man and the destiny of democracy. I urge every member of both parties, Americans of all religions and of all colors, from every section of this country, to join me in that cause. At times, history and fate meet at a single time, in a single place, to shape a turning point in man's unending search for freedom. So it was at Lexington and Concord. So it was a century ago at Appomattox. So it was last week in Selma, Alabama. There, long-suffering men and women peacefully protested the denial of their rights as Americans. Many were brutally assaulted. One good man, a man of God, was killed. There is no cause for pride in what has happened.
All right. President Johnson was referring to the first of the civil rights marches, where marchers marched at 50 miles from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. And they were attacked on that first march by the police in Alabama. It actually has a name now. We refer to it as Bloody Sunday. And so many of those who were voting and those who were marching were voting or desiring to vote. And so they were protesting the right or being denied the right to vote. And so we have now, I'm going to ask Roz to share with us why you're working for the voters' rights, the League of Voters' Writers, and the League of Women's Voters, and tell why you feel that that's an important right for people to get involved in.
Well, I mean, do you want me to talk about the history of the Voting Rights Act?
You can talk about.
I mean, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is considered by the U.S. Department of Justice to be the single most effective piece of civil rights legislation in the history of the country. Prior to 1965 Voting Rights Act, only 1/3 of black voters were registered. 2/3 of white citizens were registered to vote. And following the 1965 Voting Rights Act, there began to be parity between blacks and whites in terms of the level of voter registration. Just some additional history. The 14th Amendment gave people who were born in the U.S. the right to be citizens, and the 15th Amendment ensured that the right to vote could not be denied by virtue of a person's race. However, there were other ways that then the southern state legislatures were able to restrict the right of blacks to vote in the Deep South. In many of the districts, there was an absolute majority of black potential voters, but their right to register and vote began to be restricted by various measures, including poll taxes, which
yes.
was you had to pay a tax in order to vote. So it could mean taking food out of your children's mouth to pay to go and vote. Grandfather clause, which allowed whites whose grandfather had been allowed to vote even though they could not pass a literacy test. A literacy test was another method, and it's not, as I once believed, a literacy test is not a test of can you read. It was selectively administered to blacks as opposed to whites, sometimes very, very lengthy, and a single mistake would fail you. You could not register. It was quite shocking for me to look at some of these.
So, and they also ask inappropriate questions, like name the judges in the county.
All of them. Okay, so why did you feel that it was important for you to get involved in this political process of voting and getting people registered and voting? You, Roz.
Well, it pains me, and I think all of us, to see situations where people fail to vote because they give up on the political process. It goes on without you if you give up. You're just not part of it. And so you don't gain anything, you're not changing anything by not voting. You're merely hurting yourself and letting someone else decide for you how your money is spent, whether or not a marijuana medical dispensary is built on your block or not. I mean, there are lots of things that, particularly local and state elections, are extremely important. And things that matter in people's day-to-day lives are decided by your elected representatives at the city and state level. Things like, potholes and schools and taxes.
Well, do you have anything to add to that? Because I'm just getting tons of literature coming through, and I'm wondering who's paying for all of this. Are my tax dollars paying for all of this literature that I toss?
Some of it, yes. If you get something from the County Board of Elections, yes, that's your tax money. But some of what I think I saw are advertisements for people who want to run for an office. Then they have to pay for their own literature.
And the people who pay are the campaign contributions, and it can be contributions from your neighbors and from you. It can be contributions from a billionaire donor in South Carolina. You can find out who's paying for these for any of the city by going to ethics.lacity.org, or there are websites at the state level as well, but these are political contributions from individuals, corporations, and nonprofit organizations.
Okay, well, I'll tell you this. I had an experience, and I was working the presidential poll, the last presidential poll in which President Barack Obama won. And so there was, there were two stories. One is that a young man came in and said, I said, well, come on in. It's time to vote. And he goes, well, I can't come in. I just came with my friend. And I said, well, just like your friend came to vote, why aren't you voting? And he said, well, I'm not eligible to vote because I'm still on parole, and I've got another 2 years before I can vote. Would you tell us something about that process, please?
Yes. Basically, in the state of California, if you are convicted of a felony and are either on probation or off parole, you can vote. However, if you are convicted of a felony and are still on parole by the state, then you have to wait until you're off parole to re-register and vote. And there's been a recent wrinkle in that. In 2011, the people in the state voted to release lower-level felony offenders and put them under community supervision by county agencies. Those individuals can vote. There was some confusion over whether or not being under community supervision was the same as being on parole. That has recently been decided in August in favor of ex-felons under community supervision being allowed, frankly encouraged, to vote, to get connected to their communities.
That's interesting. You would say that. Do you want to add something to that?
Yes, I was registering people to vote in 2012 before the presidential election. And a young man, when I asked everyone in the room if they were registered, said no, and he wanted to whisper to me that he didn't think he was qualified. Well, after he told me his story, he had been sent to prison for a short term for a drug offense. But the parole was over, and therefore he was eligible. He was just elated. I registered him, and every election he calls me to ask me advice since 12 on who to vote for. And I'll say, now, read your literature and look at, the strong points of this person and so forth, because league members don't tell other people how to vote.
Well, that's good.
For candidates. Now, we do talk about propositions.
Okay.
So that helps.
That's good. I had a young man come into the poll, and he said, "I'm here to vote." And I go, "Oh, that's exciting." He says, "This is my first time." And I said, "Why?" He wasn't so young. I mean, he probably was in his 20s. And I said, "Well, why is it your first time?" He said, "I never knew I could vote until Obama said I could." And I'm thinking, where have we been? Why don't these young people know that they should register to vote when they turn 18? Someone please respond to that.
All right. One of the things that they really need is information, education about it. I belong to a sorority that before the 2012 elections decided that we would deal with schools. And that was a wonderful experience. I went to Washington Prep, and we registered at just lunchtime. I registered 40 youngsters. The NAACP had a table, and there was another group that had a table. And each one of us averaged about the same. These young people were thrilled that they had the right to vote, and they were 17. They did not know that they needed to be 18 by the election day, and we assured them when they told us the birthday and all that they would be, and they were just elated. We also went to a junior college, or a community college, they call it, that dates me, and registered young people who, again, were turning 18, or they were 18 or 19 or even 20. They had never registered to vote.
Well, tell us about this registration process. I had, well, this is another time when I was working the polls, I was checking in people, checking their names, and this young man came in, he was all proud, he goes, "I'm here to vote." I go, "Yeah, okay, cool, let me find your name." And then I'm looking, I'm going, "Your name is not here." He said, "It's got to be there. I registered." I said, "When did you register?" "Oh, I registered online." "When?" "Yesterday." And it wasn't on the printout. So would you tell us about the registration process, please? Ross?
Well, the registration in California, it means you have to register at least 15 days before the election in which you want to vote. You can't register the day before or at the polls. And if you register online, that works very well as long as you have something that with a signature on it, like a driver's license or a state ID card. They can compare the signature then with your signature on the roster book at the polling place.
Okay. Well, tell me one of your personal stories. Let's hear from you. One of your personal stories about why you know that your work makes a difference.
Gloria, one of the programs that the League of Women Voters is sponsoring now is called Voting Basics, and it's for new citizens or people who are taking citizenship classes and who are brand new to the whole idea of voting. And it's a 1-hour program, and we go through how to register in some detail and what it means, etc. And we bring along an actual voting booth from the LA County Registrar and an Ink-A-Vote machine and sample ballots. And we hand out sample ballots to the students, and they mark a sample ballot. They can vote for president for Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, or Madison. I mean, it's a practice. Yeah. But they actually mark the ballot and hold it in their hands and put it in and take it out. We had, just one example is there was a woman from Korea who had been a citizen for 10 years and had registered to vote, but she had been hesitant. She didn't know how to do it. She wondered what would happen if she went to the polling place. And after our little class, she said, "Oh, I'm going to finally go to the polling place and vote."
All right. Wow, you made a believer out of her. Why is it important that they vote, Marcia?
Okay. Politics and politicians decide the wars we fight, the interest we pay, the speed you drive, the taxes you pay, and so many other things. And in order to have a voice, voting is the best way to have that voice. And it isn't that difficult to register to vote. Some people think it's complicated. There are people who will help you. And it isn't that difficult to vote, and we need to have, more situations where people can practice, as you spoke of, Roz. But not to be afraid of the process. That as a citizen, it is our right to vote. It is our duty and responsibility to vote.
Did you share your entire list? I thought you had other things on your list of why
Yes.
it's important to vote.
I will. Politics and politicians control the purity of your food, the schooling of your children, the value of your money, the weights and measures you use, the floor under your wages. Politics and politicians hand out subsidies to farmers, subsidies to airlines, subsidies to oil companies, subsidies to magazines and newspapers, and to bankers and builders. Politicians and politics protect or destroy your right to speak freely, your right to worship freely, your right to organize, and your right to vote. So it's very important that you vote so that you have some voice in what happens in the government.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to give one example of a current election, which is the Compton Unified School District is holding an election this November 3rd. 20 people are running for 3 seats.
20?
20,
Okay.
Gloria, for 3 seats. And along with voting for school board in Compton, there is also something called Measure S, placed on the ballot by the board last June, and it is a proposition that the city of Compton issue $350 million in school bonds. And that's a very important issue for the residents of Compton. And yet, and it requires a 55% majority to pass it. But because it's just a school board election, it's not a general election, there is some concern that not very many people will decide this very important issuance of a lot of bond money that the citizens of Compton will be required to pay back. So pay attention to local measures as well.
Okay, that's good advice. I do have a question, though. I was very concerned about this, so I looked it up, but I want to hear your response. In working the polls, there were some people who came in who didn't speak English, and so we needed to send them to a voter's box where there was a machine with 10 different languages, the ballot in 10 different languages. And so I'm wondering, why don't we just have the ballots in English only? Would one of you address that, please?
Well, I think the Voting Rights Act, when it was amended in 1975, added in a requirement for districts with 5% or more of a minority language speakers to include their ballot materials in that language.
Okay, so then my question was this. If that's 10 different languages, and we have 45 different languages in our local area, are we discriminating against the other 35?
Well, that is a good question. They put, I think, for practical and monetary reasons, some floor on that, so that it is costly to produce, voting materials in each language.
Okay. Well, I've come to the point now where I'm going to ask you, if I have decided, I've made up my mind that my vote doesn't count. There are millions of people who know all about all this information. They know these people personally. I don't know these people. They only call me at election time. Why should I vote? Does my vote count? How would you respond to me to encourage me to vote?
Oh, Gloria, each vote, and particularly in some elections, every single vote counts. I know in 2014 in the Valley, the state assembly seat for my district was open, and they had two candidates running, one Republican, one Democrat. And it was we got a lot of phone calls from both of the candidates. In the end, out of 30,000 votes cast, the winner won by 300 votes. I mean, that, for people who didn't vote, who cared, that was huge. They had radically different, each of those candidates had a radically different agenda that they wanted to carry out. So you need to...
So why should I vote?
You should vote to make sure that you have participated in the process and be heard.
Good. You had a chance to be heard. Okay, what do you say, Marcia? How would you encourage me to vote?
One of the reasons all the advertising is done on TV and you get all these mailers is to try to get you to vote. So the politicians who are running know the value of getting people to vote for them. And so if there's a candidate who really speaks more to what you would want the candidate to do when they're in office, it is important to vote for that person. Tom Bradley would have won the governorship if he had gotten a few more votes from every precinct in Los Angeles.
Wow,
so that tells
that's
you something. And this has been true. I wish I couldn't find this information quickly in my files, but I wished I could have told you many other elections that were very, very close. And there had to be a recount because they were so close.
That's good information. I know that even in the scriptures, in the book of Acts, chapter 1, verses 23 through 26, there were two candidates that were put before the apostles, and they were told to choose between these two as to which one. It's Matthias and Joseph. To choose which one would replace Judas Iscariot, who had betrayed Jesus. And so the people cast lots, and they voted, and Matthias won that election. So voting is not unusual. It's not new. It goes way back, and everybody needs to be involved in the political process because ultimately we're all impacted by the vote. So as you're sitting watching the presidential debates, just know that this is not just entertainment. You will be impacted by the outcome of this next election and any of the elections if you live in a particular area. So in closing now, I just want to say thank you to Marcia James and Rosalind Tyson for coming to share with us today from the League of Women Voters. We encourage you to register to vote so you won't be left out. We don't want you shut out of this election that is forthcoming, especially the presidential election that has so many candidates vying for office right now. So I thank you so much for listening. May the good news bless your heart. Remember that Jesus loves you, and I'm praying for you, and have a blessed day.
I must do.